Hello, and welcome back to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro, a podcast all about the Bible, theology, and all things related to the Christian faith. I'm the Ryan half of Ryan and Brian, and this is episode number 55. Today is a very special day in the Bistro, as today is the Bistro's 1-year anniversary. And because it is our anniversary, this episode is going to be a little bit different. Brian and I are taking a look back at a couple of our favorite episodes, reflecting on what we've learned, how the podcast is being used, and what our plans are for the future of the Bistro. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that you can find us at thebiblebistro.com, on Instagram and Facebook at The Bible Bistro. You can watch us on YouTube as well at Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. If you're watching us there, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We've also set up a Patreon account, so if you're enjoying the podcast and finding it useful, and you would like to support our continued work, you can do that. You can find a link for that in the show notes, but also by going to the website, thebiblebistro.com, and clicking on the link at the top. If you can't financially support us, you could also support the Bistro by simply sharing the podcast with others or leaving us a review on Apple Podcast. That helps us as well. All right, let's jump right into our 1-year anniversary episode. Hey, Brian, welcome back to the Bistro.
Hey, Ryan, long time no see.
Yes, it's been hours. It's been a week, yes. That's accurate.
How are you doing?
I'm good. We just had a wonderful lunch.
Yeah. Oh, man. You want to mention that there'll be some pictures up on Insta maybe. It's
Insta, look at you being all hip.
The Insta. I don't know.
I call it the gram.
I don't know what it means.
Or face page.
The restaurant though, tell the name, because
Kaplinger's Fresh Catch.
If you are in the southern Indianapolis region, or there's a north side location.
No, there's a couple locations. Okay. They have fresh fish that you can go and get and bring home, but they also have counter service.
Yes.
And they have excellent fish and
very good.
Very good. You had a oyster.
I did. I got a free oyster.
Are you part of the what's the Shuck Club?
Shooter. It's a
Club.
shooter. Yeah, it's a raw oyster with seafood sauce on it. You know, the seafood. What's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know. I'm going to make you struggle
cocktail
for it.
sauce.
I like to watch you struggle.
Because I usually make you do that.
You know that is true. And today is a very special day.
Yes.
As we're in the Bistro. And because today is 1 calendar year, of the Bistro.
Wow. Congratulations, Ryan.
Congratulations to you.
Did you think we would ever make it this far?
I mean, I thought I would live to this point in time. I'm not sure. I thought the Bistro would always make it. I mean, we've had a great year.
Yeah, it's been a good year. There's been a lot happen.
There has been a lot happen. And so this week we thought we'd kind of take a look back. Now, this isn't going to be like a clip show, like from like Friends or Seinfeld. You know, I hate those shows. I mean, it kind of relives some funny moments. But we wanted to talk about like some of the things that we've learned or our favorite episodes, but also take a little bit of a look at where we're going.
Right.
Because
maybe a peek behind the curtain.
Ooh, a behind the curtain. Like
behind the scenes.
Well, it does feel like magic, I'm sure, to all of our listeners.
I have not heard it described as magic, but we'll go with that metaphor.
Well, this is like a Disney behind the magic. Oh, sorry. We don't say that name anymore, Disney. Anyway, that's old.
Let's not go there.
Scratch that from the record. Anyway, all right. So I thought we'd start with maybe just talking about like the intentions of the Bistro, because I think this is going to be kind of important for us talking about where we're going in the future.
Well, you know, this was your idea. This whole thing was your idea.
This was my idea. And as we've talked about in one of our episodes, I read a book. Yeah. But even before then, you and I had some conversations, and I was trying to whip you.
I had turned you down numerous times. You had suggested this.
Yes, it was like my love life all over again, getting turned down. You're just like, Ryan, I just want to be friends. We're not doing a podcast. But you know, one of my intentions was, I'd had you as a professor.
Yeah.
Is I knew you were a great teacher, and one of the things that, like, for me, is what I wanted to do is, I wanted to help people get excited about Scripture again. You know, and helping. You know, as we've talked about this before, it's like pastors typically have 35, maybe if you're in a generous church, you're getting 45 minutes at pulpit time. Now, that doesn't mean people are paying attention for that long.
Right.
But, there's only so much time typically that people are giving you. And so how can we help create resources to help people feel engaged and look at some of these more complex issues with Scripture? Because sometimes it's easy for us just to kind of skip off the surface or say, like, I don't understand this. How do I find something out?
Go to something else. I remember you talked a lot about wanting to make sure at the beginning your idea was to talk about things that impacted our issues in everyday life, and here's how here's why it matters. You're always asking the so what question and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and it was always feeling like it's one thing for us, I think, to read Scripture or to read the Bible and read a story and go, oh, that's nice, but kind of going, how do we take this all together and put this into a package to say, like, this is what this says about God? Like, this is, instead of just knowing a story, how can we, parse out of that, like, what is this saying about God and how does this impact my life? Besides just kind of going, oh, that's a cool story.
Right.
But how does that fit in that whole narrative of what God's done?
Well, and I'll say, I have to confess, I mean, I was very reluctant, and you had to continue. I actually said no to you a few times, and you kept coming back. And so, and I will say that it's been, over the past year, we've seen that this has been something that people have responded well to and has become useful to some people. And so good on you to continue to push me. And
this is the only good thing I've done. I mean,
cajole me and rope me into this. So.
That still feels like it's a little negative, like rope you in. That's usually like when something's like, how did you get roped into this? It's like, oh, I don't know how that happened.
Take it for what you will.
Anyway, so looking back, again, this isn't going to be a clip show. Looking back, like, we've had some good episodes. What have been some of your favorite things from this last year?
Well, I have to go. One of our really early episodes was John 14, and I love teaching that passage because it's one of those examples we've talked about that we can.
What's the passage, real quick? Remind us.
John 14 is the one about, in my Father's house are many, many rooms, many dwelling places. If we're not, so I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And we talked about that in relation to the temple theme in the Gospel of John, temple imagery. And so, if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it. But I love to teach that passage because, again, culturally, we have a particular idea about that passage, but when we really begin to use some of the tools of biblical interpretation and even narrative, like looking at the way that John chose to tell his story there, you begin to see it in a different way. And it's always fun to have people, and we've gotten good reaction to that.
Yeah,
to that
we had
episode.
quite a few listeners on that one.
Yeah,
and it's been that's been good, and I think it's because it has been that whole. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. But like changing, like thinking differently about some of those key issues.
And then we had some good questions that come out.
Absolutely,
after that,
yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was one of my favorites. I have to say, I think one of my favorite episodes from this season 1 or last year was when we did What Sin Says About God.
Right.
And you talked about like sin is this hollowing out piece for us, and kind of repositioning. Instead of making sin the real thing, God's the real thing. And so I'd read earlier in the year, I'd read some stuff from Thomas Oden.
Right.
And Thomas Oden was a Wesleyan theologian who didn't really become popular until after his death, but he'd gone through, you would say, and this is a popular term to say, like his own modernity deconstruction, and then came back to Orthodox faith. And he wrote a book called The Transforming Power of Grace. And it was about... That book was about that God gives us all the grace we need to combat sin in our lives. Like we need to recognize that, and it's sanctification or whatever. But thinking about sin differently and quit putting so much emphasis on the sin, but like kind of putting our emphasis on God and the grace that He gives us in all of that. And so I really enjoyed that episode. And we had some good reaction to that because I think that helps us think about, instead of putting the focus on sin, it's back on God. God is real. Sin is just this hollowing out of taking less of what God has given us away.
Yeah, and I think that was good. When that was one of our early ones, when we switched over to doing some YouTube episodes, and that's one of the things I think we learned over the last year. And it's been interesting to see how people have responded differently in a YouTube environment than in the podcast too.
Yeah, I've learned a lot of things on the YouTube, and I think this is
is that the official name, the YouTube?
The YouTube. It's one of the things I've learned since we've been doing the YouTube is this happened a couple weeks ago, and I'll kind of jump ahead of this, is I should not record a podcast with video when I'm sick, because I had a little bit of a cold.
Right.
And I started with some fine energy because I was interacting. And then I noticed I look like I'm on drugs in the video. If you haven't seen it, it's the John Weatherly episode. My father was gracious enough to point that out to me.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I knew it when I was editing it as well. I was like, oh my gosh, I look terrible.
You know what they say though, the show must go on. So kudos to you to
it's like Broadway.
Yeah, right. We got to do the show. Come on, we got to get this together. So you did fine. Yes. It was good.
Yeah. So we started doing the YouTube as well. So what have been some surprises for you though? I mean, through some of this stuff, because we've also heard from quite a few.
Yeah, we have. I think when we started, of course, you have this kind of vision, and I'll say we put a ton of episodes in the can early on. We had 14 or 12 or 14.
12, 14, 16. 4 months.
And our ideas was we don't want this to be one of those podcasts that kind of, you see a few weeks and then you don't hear from them for a month, and then all of a sudden there's another one. And it was really important to us to be regularly putting things out. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked a lot about what we expected our audience to be, but we've been surprised by, and we were kind of thinking maybe some Sunday school teachers or small group leaders, but basically people in the church are kind of interested. We didn't think that we would be appealing much to people who had some theological education, but it's been surprising the number of former students I've had that are really interested. So they've had maybe a college or a seminary theological education, and the pastors that have talked to us, ministers of the churches that have used our podcast, who it's become a regular part of their week. I think that's been really surprising to us. We didn't, in fact, I can remember a few of the people who are regular listeners now saying, well, we're thinking about this. Give me some ideas. This isn't really for you, but what would people in your church want to hear? And so it's been gratifying, I think, to hear.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they've used it in Sunday schools or, I think that's been interesting for us is, we never intended it as like the podcast as curriculum per se, but that's how it's being used. And so I have to say, one of the things that's been most surprising, though, that's on the inverse of this, is the lack of interaction. Right. So, I mean, here's the deal. Neither one of you are like social media. No. I mean, I call YouTube the YouTube.
Right.
You call Insta. I call it the gram. But whatever. I'm right. But, we've asked several times for people to give us interactions. And it's a bad, but kind of, I think this is the one thing that I think it's even surprised you and I is coming up with the topics sometime for us to talk about.
We're like, what are we going to talk about now?
Yes, that's been a bit of an interesting thing for us. Because I think the thing is, it's one of those things of, when you have so much knowledge, you don't know what other people want. And I'm not saying I have that knowledge, but it's kind of going like things that we think like, oh, people don't want to hear about that.
Right.
But it's what some people
sometimes it's surprising what people are responding to. And I would say the other thing is, we had recorded a lot of these, and I was kind of honestly pretty nervous when we first started putting them out. I'm like, oh, we heard back from anybody yet? I'm expecting this, and crickets, but now we hear along the way, people will suddenly say, oh, hey, I've been listening to your podcast. It's like, well, that's the first I've heard of it, So,
we love you all. This is not a shaming thing.
Not at all. It was interesting. It was not what I was expecting. And we've asked a few times, give us some topics, and we've gotten some good topics, and we have integrated some of those to the show. But I guess I would just say, let's, as we're moving forward and thinking about this, I would encourage you to reach out if there's something you'd like to hear about. We've had some good guests on, I think, over the past year. And so give us some ideas if you have somebody you want to hear from, or if you have an idea of something you'd like to hear us talk about.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What have you enjoyed most about the podcast?
Oh, a couple of things. I think the first thing is I've learned a lot.
From me? Thank you.
Yeah.
He's learned a lot about me, actually.
Yeah. We've got to know each other better. But we've had some really good guests, and every guest we've had on, we talked about. I don't think I could even pick a favorite guest, and it's like picking your favorite kid, right? And I'll leave that to you. But the idea is every guest that's come on, I've learned something new, or there's been some kind of a different way of looking at things. It's been really, really helpful for me. The thing I love about that, and the thing that's really been enjoyable for me, is these are people who are experts in their field. Like I'm thinking about, Dr. Knight came on and talked about judges, and that was just fantastic. And then we've had Dr. Weatherly on a few times and talked about Luke Acts and the Passion narratives, and that's been fantastic. Ryan Burge coming on and talking about that. Chad, Chad Ragsdale talking about all of it's been really good stuff. And, I'm thinking about Greg Taylor. We had him come on and talk about some of what it was like to be a pastor. We talked about it's been a long year. There's been some really interesting, with the end of the coronavirus, so to speak, and depending on that year and the beginning of this war in Ukraine, there's been a lot going on, and so the guests have been fantastic. I think. It's been interesting to hear from some people I hadn't heard from in a while, too. And that was kind of cool, too, that some of my former students would, out of the blue, friend me on Facebook or just message me and say, hey, I just want to let you know I enjoyed this, or shared it with somebody and that kind of thing. It's been kind of cool to connect with some people in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you? What did you
I think there's a reason I asked you, as I mentioned before, there's a reason I asked you to do this. We had a relationship when I was in college. I'd come to your office oftentimes, and, you took me out to eat a couple times, and we just chat, about life and ministry and so forth. And so for me, our conversations have even, I'd been reading on my own, I've been doing other things, but like it helps. What I've enjoyed most is like the conversations we have spark things in me to think about, and to think about, I think my faith is better for it because of these conversations. And I mean, that's obviously my hope for those that listen to us. It's not like, we're changing their faith, but like help develop a deeper thinking way about their faith and how God has revealed himself.
Well, I remember early on you said something to me. You said something to the fact, this is good for me. And
absolutely.
And that really helped me appreciate why we were doing this. And I'll say, I've talked to you about it. It's got me back into reading some more serious academic literature. I kind of let that side go, that you get so busy with ministry and with, full-time life and family and this kind of thing, that sometimes you let those things go. So we've been digging and delving into some academic writing again and thinking about those things,
which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But I think that's been really good. So I think one of the things we also talked about that's kind of surprised us, and I kind of alluded to this, is how people are using the podcast.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us.
Well,
you've had some conversations.
Yeah. So again, you mentioned Sunday school. Some people are listening to it for Sunday school and having discussions surrounding that, which is kind of cool. When I talk to the person, one of the people who's using it in this kind of a setting, we've heard some people talk about it with small groups and that kind of thing. But this person who's talking about it for Sunday school said, we have enough out there now. We have 53, 54 episodes now that this person can kind of pick and choose and say, well, we're going to talk about this week, and then use it for discussion. And I think the YouTube having it on YouTube has helped us as well. The internet is a series of tubes, but having it on there and having the video has helped too. I think there are people who can engage in a different way. I'm a podcast person. I love listening to podcasts, but not everybody does.
Tell us about your kids. Your kids are like,
they're more YouTube kind of people, I think, and they're used to video. You suggest a podcast, like, I'm not gonna listen to this podcast or whatever.
But a video,
Well,
and part of that for the YouTube is, gosh, I keep saying the YouTube. Old Man Hickory over here.
TM.
Trademark, the YouTube, is, that's where people are searching, and that, that is one of our goals. It's not, you don't want to just keep talking into an empty cavern, which just kind of goes back to like, hey, respond to us. But
the other things, and I've forgotten what the original question was, but people have used it for sermon preparation. We've heard some, and again, it's kind of surprising, a different demographic that's been useful for people in sermons. I've heard people refer to them in their sermons, which has been kind of cool. We've had, the other interesting thing is people have used it to spark discussion has been a thing to notice. Do you want to tell a story about the first? So this is like, I kind of imagine if you're a recording artist and you have your record out, and the first time you hear your record on the radio,
Yeah. So I was selling something on Facebook Marketplace.
What were you selling, or can you tell us, sir?
It was actually some early podcasting equipment that we had. So I was selling it. Irony, deep. And so I was meeting this guy. And before we even met, he was like, "Oh, you're Ryan of Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro," and I was like, "I had no idea who this guy was.
Right.
He didn't know you, and it was someone that had randomly found us." And I was like, "I'm kind of becoming a big thing here."
But
it's not true. That's never happened again, and I don't care for it to happen.
Right. That was interesting though, and the interesting thing is, tell what he said about.
Oh yes, it was not only was he listening, but he was also listening with his high school son.
Right.
And they were listening together and would have conversations about the podcast.
Now, the interesting thing about this, we've had at least 3 father-son duos who've said that they've used the podcast in that way. And I find that really, that's one thing that encourages me to continue to do it, because I thought, hey, if we're sparking conversations, about theology, about life, about the Bible, that's fantastic. People are discussing it. We've heard it's discussed sometimes in staff meetings in churches, and so it has been used in different ways, and we do hope that it is useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of great uses, and so there's a couple other things I feel like I want to say that we've learned.
Okay,
I have learned I'm horrible at responding to your questions on the fly.
Some of our funny moments have been from that.
Funny moments for you where Brian just throws questions at me and I have like a stage fright, and I'm just like, I locked it.
In fairness, I'm not asking you to try to trick you. I'm usually asking something.
I know you're not trying to trick me.
I think you will know.
But it's like a conversation. Then it's like, fact check. Where are you? What are you thinking about right now? So anyway, I'm very poor at that.
Right.
You don't get some of my jokes.
That's true. Yeah. Well, you make references sometimes that go over my head.
Or I make them and you just blatantly ignore them and move on.
I ignore things I don't understand. It's kind of that's just the way it works.
Well, how do you learn then, Brian? How do you learn? I don't know. Anyway. And then also, I have to say this. So one of the things is we started YouTube.
Yeah.
And when you and I started this, we had a couple ideas of things we want to do. And the podcast was never about us making money per se. But we did set up a Patreon account.
Sure.
So, and if you're not familiar with Patreon, it's where you can like, hey, I'm going to give these people $5 a month or something like that. And
enough for a cup of coffee.
Enough for a cup of coffee or $10, like you appreciate it. Now, what we've learned about this is we have one patron,
right,
who may or may not be a family member. But what we have learned,
I mean, family members are one of our big demographics, I have to say. So.
Extended family members,
and we do appreciate.
Yeah, we do appreciate
our Patreon.
We do appreciate you. You know who you are. So one of the things we've learned about this is we kind of set it up not knowing what we were doing. Right. And there are other places that do it where you get extra stuff, and we didn't have the extra stuff lined up. And what we've realized, I think this has been a valuable lesson for you and I, is that people want things. People want things for the money. So with that said, as our Patreon...
we have a special announcement today.
We have a special announcement for raving fans of the Bistro. We are setting up, if you join us on Patreon, now this helps just offset, we use software for recording.
Right.
You're here in Indianapolis.
Right.
Gas is cheap for everybody these days. But, just to help kind of offset the cost, hosting the podcast and so forth. But if you become a patron, you can get yourself a Bible Bistro mug.
Right. Join us in drinking coffee in the Bistro with the
yes. And then we're going to have a T-shirt and some other goodies.
Now, is the T-shirt going to have your likeness on it? Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that'll sell like hotcakes.
But what would be really meta is if we could get a Carhartt shirt with me wearing a Carhartt shirt.
Well, I'm still hopeful that Carhartt will sponsor us at some time, because you are completely arrayed.
I am. I am not in a T-shirt today, but I am in the Carhartt. Yeah, I had someone ask me once when they saw me in Carhartt if I was a farmer.
No, you're working in the soil of the kingdom. But anyway,
that is a preacher quote.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So here's the other thing I'll say about just in regard to that. Again, I will tell you, I appreciate you. You just kind of made fun of yourself, but I appreciate you. All this technical stuff, all that part of it, I would have no idea, and you've done a great job with that. You and Lauren, your wife, who is actually the brains of the operation,
she does quite a bit for us.
Yeah, and so. All that's, donated, you do all that for free. So, again, this is just asking for donations. If this is valuable to you, if it's something that you enjoy, then we just ask you to do that.
Yeah, you can go to our website and just there's a little button at the top, just click on it, and it goes there.
Now, you want to talk about what's coming ahead then?
Yeah. So, okay. So we've talked about that. And I think now we can get to something that's maybe valuable for someone that's listening to this, besides us just riffing on what's happened last year. So we started these conversations, and it was all about like helping people understand Scripture and what was happening. And at the same time, you and I are having conversations about the ever-changing world that's happening around us. And we had a conversation with Chad Ragsdale. Chad Ragsdale was talking about, one of the things was talking about apologetics and like how do we defend our faith. But one of the things he pointed out is like we can't be using old methods for new problems, basically.
Yeah, questions are always contextual is one of the things he said. And so when we go to answer questions as Christians and thinking about how to respond to our culture, to our neighbors, really, I shouldn't say culture, really to the people around us, we need to do so in a way that's using the thinking and the language of the day.
Yeah. So we actually mentioned a couple books in
that.
Yeah,
he did. A couple of really good books.
Really good books.
Yeah, Kennedy's book, and then...
Yes. So we had... one of the books that was talked about it's called A Secular Age by Charles Taylor. Now, I'd gotten it for Christmas because I was like, I'd read in places like, this is the book to read.
Yeah, and there's lots of people who reference it.
Yes, and I opened it up and I was like, I'm in some deep water.
And I'd bought the book several years ago. I had somebody recommend it to me, and it had sat on my desk, and I had read some of it. But again, like I said, you get busy. If you don't have a real good reason to read it, then you don't necessarily do that. So.
Yes. So I'd gotten it and I was like, oof, that's going to go on my shelf. Maybe that's a one-day book. And so we had that episode, and then you and I had a conversation. Like, maybe we should read this book together.
Seemed pretty significant.
Seemed pretty significant, and it is a significant tome of knowledge. And so you and I have been reading this together, and we both, I think, well, you're helping me understand some of this, but realize that this kind of stuff was going to be really important for us as Christians going forward. So like, I mean, can you kind of give us a brief synopsis of what the book's about?
I don't know if I can do that.
No. The book is like 800 pages, and I can read like 10 pages in 30 minutes.
It's pretty dense, but I will say he's really asking the question, how have we gotten from a place in the 1500s where it would have been almost unthinkable to live in a culture where you didn't believe in God to and he uses 2000, it's kind of the round number, from 1500 to 2000. How have we gotten to a place where it's almost difficult to continue to have faith? You know, how have we gotten to this place where not only is unbelief an option, but there are a number of different ways to disbelieve, so to speak. And so the important thing about it, I think, is that we can't, as Chad Ragsdale said to us, we can't continue to answer, kind of the old questions or new questions in the old way. And so we kind of need to think about where we are as a culture. The thing I appreciate most about Taylor, and I said to you this early on, I remember writing this in the margin, that the brilliant thing about the book is he's trying, there's the old saying about a fish doesn't know it's in water. This idea that we're swimming in an environment that we're not even aware of. And what Taylor's doing in this book, I think, is trying to make us aware of the environment in which we live, the things that we just take for granted. That's the way things are. This is just the way the universe is, or this is just the way our society is. He's trying to make us think about why we assume those things, and to recognize that we're also in this stream of thought that hasn't come to an end, but is continuing. We haven't come to some kind of conclusion, but it's an ongoing process. Now, the reason I think that's important is because, again, if we want to have good conversations with our neighbors and with non-believers particularly, we need to understand some of these ideas. And in fact, he says one of the things he talks about in this book is so many times, and I think this has been an experience all of us have had over the past few years, so many times we find ourselves talking past one another because we're coming from completely different starting points. And so given all of that, we think this is something we're going to be talking about in the months to come. Some of the ways that impacts us in our churches and in as Christian leaders.
Yeah, and it helps try to. I think it's helping me, and we're reading this alongside another book as well that's kind of in a similar vein. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self with Carl Trueman. But try to go, it seems to me, I'm 40 years old, and you always say, like, I don't even understand the world that I'm living in. Like things that are happening in our world that it seems like, I don't even understand this. Like, you just feel like it's craziness.
Well, and you have young kids, and you think about the younger generation.
I worry about my kids and kind of going, what's the world around them going to say, like, oh, you have to say this or you don't? And I think what these books are trying to show, and I think the benefit to us as we continue to make podcasts and some other material, I think we're going to talk about here in a second, is how do we engage with that world? And so we can understand what's driving these things and what's driving these, I'm going to say the word movements, but just this push that seems to be happening. Because I think for a lot of people, it's kind of going, I don't understand this at all.
We've talked about worldview before and just how important it is. Even the way we communicate. We can say the same thing, but if we're saying it in different context, it's going to have different significance, different meaning. You mentioned the other things. From the beginning, the idea has been that we would also try to develop maybe some video curriculum, some different thoughts. And so one of the things we want to do is try to think about how to put together a class that might deal with some of these deeper issues. Before that, we'll probably put out some other classes just on some biblical books or some theological topics that we think will be useful. Or ideas maybe to use this in a small group setting or Sunday school again, or whatever, even a home setting might be a useful thing. So look for that hopefully in the next year.
Yeah, and if you've got some ideas for us as well, we've got some ideas, but you got Facebook you can send us a message on. You can go to our webpage. There's a button up there to send us an email, or if you know either one of us, personally, feel free to send a text message. I mean, that's one of the things, again, the purpose of the podcast was to make a tool and a resource for people. And so I think as we engaged with some of these books that we've read recently, I think it really gave us a clear picture of, like, how can we be a benefit to the kingdom through that,
and positive. We've tried to be positive throughout. We want to continue to do that. We don't want to be everything's negative, but we want to talk about how we can positively in a way engage the world and culture around us.
Yeah, so that's exciting. We're reading the book. You never have to read it.
Although, if you want to.
If you want to. I have told Brian, I said this the other day on the Charles Taylor book, I'm like, this is a book that I will read and I will keep on my shelf, and I'll say, see that book? I read it, and I'll never pick it up again. Not because it's not good, but because it's intense reading. So,
in fact, let us hear from if you've read this book. Let us know your thoughts on it too. It'd be interesting.
Yes. You have 100 words or less to tell us what you think about it. So, well, Brian, I think, we didn't talk about the Bible today. I mean, we talked about what it's been like the last year and kind of where we're going. And so I want to say, you thank me for the technology and stuff. And I just want to say thank you to you for, you've given your time and you accepted my pushing on you. With some hesitation, but you're part of this, and I think it's been, I'm speaking for myself, but I think for a lot of listeners, it's been really helpful and growing for us. So
very good. We've had some good coffee, we've had some good meals, good conversations,
and more to come.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
All right. See you, Ryan.
See you. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro and being a part of the last year with us. Your support and encouragement keep us going. We will be back next Tuesday.